Being real, topic, personality. This is session 3. So this week we met. We asked some questions. We came in a little bit different than normal. We've been watching videos and things like that, mixing it up. This time, no electronic devices were used. Well, I can't say that. Phones work, but we'll get to that. So, just met to talk. Had a group of 4 this time, so multiple people weren't able to make it, unfortunately, but that's okay. It's still good. First question: what makes us who we are? I start with an easy one. So we created a list of those. Here is the list. God was the first thing, but we kind of took that out of the equation, not because it's not in the equation, but because it's in every aspect of this. So it was more, okay, well, what did he create that makes us like what? So upbringing, parenting, and there's a difference between that, and we spoke to that, and when we went around later, it'll make more sense. But upbringing is basically not just the parenting influence, but maybe a bigger family or church family or more people involved. So that's the differentiation. If you had a really strong parenting influence and not a whole lot outside of that, parenting is one. If upbringing kind of encompasses all the different influences you had as far as raising you up. Environment, temperament, life experiences, and faith. So those are the ones that we came up with just in the group talking about it. And then I said, okay, feel free to look up Google, whatever, to see what it says there. And there were a few things that we didn't list that Google said. Genetics, big one, and how we perceive self. It came up with personality too, but that's not really, we're talking about personality. It's all kind of what influences personality and like the overall stuff, what makes us who we are. So purposely a general question, just to see where we're at. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and a half things. I don't know if I'm going to put them up here. I don't know. It takes a lot longer to edit videos when you do all that stuff. But after that, so you might see them. After that, we did. I challenged everybody. Did I challenge everybody? No. I asked them, could you whittle that down, the like 9.5 or whatever, to 5 that influenced you, or that were the biggest for you? And just going off the cuff, I had a theory in my head, but so we went around the room and everybody picked their 5 of the ones that we had that really kind of defined them, which was pretty cool. Not going into names, just going through, so one was like parenting, life experiences, environment, perception of self and faith. Another one was faith, upbringing, environment, perception of self, temperament. Another one was parents, faith, experiences, self-perception, temperament. Another one was parenting, faith, experiences, temperament, perception of self. Another one was parenting, experiences, faith, temperament, and environment. Some similarities, multiple similarities, couple differences. So that was kind of the easiest part. Then I said, well, there are 5 things. Could you apply a percentage to each of them and how much influence each of those things had on you? We did it. It took a little bit longer. And honestly, we're just winging it here, right? So that, I won't go into those details per se, but everybody wrote down their own, and then their own ones, the 5, and then percentage for each of them. It had to equal 100. That was the rule. It had to equal 100%. Somebody's like, I can just do 20s all the way down. Whatever. Nobody did that, by the way. So it was good. Then, kind of looked at some different things. I don't want to say outliers, but things that kind of stood out, and it was like, oh, you said this. Why was that such a big thing? Not psychoanalyzing. We were just kind of talking. So, for instance, the upbringing. There was one person, I think everybody but one said parenting. And upbringing for that one was because a little bit bigger family, more influence from family, more influence from the church, camps, like grew up in camps and things like that. So upbringing was like multiple sources helped that person raise up the way that they were raised up. You know what I mean. So I was like, oh, yeah, that really helped us identify the difference, And another one was parenting. The grandparents or grandparent was a big influence, but that was still parenting, right? That was immediate family kind of stuff. So that was interesting and important to differentiate, because we did kind of struggle with that initially. Well, isn't upbringing parenting? Not necessarily. You might not have been raised by parents, or bigger picture or bigger sphere of influence. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, so we went through and did that. There were some other observations. We'll kind of tie some of that in as we go to the next thing. Interesting that temperament was on 4 of the 5. And most of the people in the group really didn't realize how big of a deal temperament was, because until we studied it, me included. So that was interesting. One person had temperament at 50% of their total. That's how important, like their innate way to deal with stuff really had a big impact on other things. And there are studies and things out there that'll say, I think temperament's 30 to 50. It's all whatever. What I wanted us to do is just kind of look at self, right? That's what all this is about. But figure out what the influence was on us. And I think that was a pretty good way to get into some conversations, which we had. We then talked about nature versus nurture, what the difference between that is. And then we even listed, we went to the 9 different options and identified which ones were nature and which ones were nurture. So genetics, nature. What was the other one? Temperament, nature. The rest of them are in the nurture category, which just means influence. And some of them, like environment, might not be a nurturing environment, but it was still nurture. It's not nature, the nature side of it. It's that piece of it. We even Googled that after we filled it out. So that's the deal. We kind of go through it, and then we're able to go to Google. When I say we're able to, people ask my permission if they're allowed to go to Google. Check it out. It's kind of funny, but we're doing it. We're having the discussion, thinking for ourselves first, which is awesome. So one of the other things that I was going to say something. Ironically, not a single person that was there had genetics on their top 5 influences. Now temperament was there, but not genetics. So I think that speaks volumes as well. Now, one of the other things that I mentioned, and that I saw from last week that I kind of wanted to dig into a little bit more, was everybody in the group last week, and there were a couple different people there this week, but still tested the same. Somebody came in that missed, but went ahead and took the test real quick and got up to speed. Actually had taken one online, downloaded it, and then did that. So came in prepared, which was awesome. So we were able to pick up and talk about some of that stuff. So anyway, the agreeableness one of the big 5, everybody had. And if you read the agreeableness, I don't have it around here right now, but look up the agreeableness part of the big 5 and read the characteristics of that trait, because big 5 are traits. Myers-Briggs are types. But if you read that, it'll tie in, I think, to what this is anyway. So that part of it is pretty much focusing on others, not being selfish. I mean, that's the short version of it, I guess. And everybody in the group had that as a 1 or 2 on their big 5. Everyone in the group had faith, if you picked up on that, in their 5. Everyone. And there's a direct correlation between faith and agreeableness, because everything, if you're following and you're trying to better yourself and do, pretty common trend, pretty common theme to take care of others throughout Scripture, even outside of Scripture, any of that stuff. So that was a pretty direct correlation. Everybody had that in common, which is kind of neat to see. And that wasn't the case earlier on. We had some discussion about, I don't remember how we got on it, but it was, I think it was related to that, where it was like, well, that everybody's that way. It's like, or something along those lines. I think it was just like one of those things that was said without really thinking through it, but it allowed us to kind of go, well, wait, is it? Because we're all created to be selfish. Selfishness is like when you look at little kids and stuff like that, they're not looking at other people. So by nature, we're selfish. Faith allows us and shows us and opens our eyes and to not just that. Obviously, there's some of you that might be like, oh, but there's going to be a tie back somewhere. We've in our discussions, there's a tie back to that for sure, where you aren't selfish, you are taking care of others. Maybe it's somebody who was an example to you, and maybe their faith was what made them be that way. However the case may be, but that was a very interesting thing as well. So then we went back to, I think we talked about this last week, but we hit it again. Why is it important to know the difference between temperament and personality? Temperament can't be changed, and if you're in a relationship with somebody and you want them to change something that is part of their temperament, it's not going to change. And if you consent, we had some discussion about that. Examples were given, but if you continue to attack that person for something that's part of their temperament, not only are you expecting them to change something that they can't change, but that's going to cause conflict in that relationship. I mean, big time. So that's an important thing. Now, if it's a personality thing, if it's something that can, obviously, you can work through that and do those things. And we gave examples of that and how that worked. And there was someone in the group that talked about how they changed their personality at a certain time, but because we knew that person's temperament, really what it seemed more like is that person was, because of other influences, kind of shutting themselves down, and they were more of an outgoing person. So at one point they just started becoming who they were meant to be, what the innate part of them was telling them to be like. So that really gave us some different perspective. it's pretty neat. Gives you some different perspectives for sure. Excuse me. Personality can change, which we talked about. How can we change our own personality? It was brought up. Self-assessment and reflection was something that we said. Changing your environment, getting away from bad friends or poor influences. Things that replay in your head, like training yourself to do that. So examples of that were given. To summarize, we determined the influence and how we got to who we are. Going into next week. So this is personality. So we did temperaments. We spent a couple. So we went through a whole study on temperaments, and we've spent the last 3 weeks on personality. We talked about it a little bit. We don't really need to dig in to each of the personalities. The four-letter Myers-Briggs, and then the big 5. we didn't really need to dig more into that. What that helped us do is identify and confirm, okay, that is me. It kind of forced us to look at that and go, oh, that is who I am. But we as a group didn't want to dive any deeper into like those types and dig further than that summary and that affirmation of those traits and those types that we are. We all agreed that they were accurate. They described our traits and our types, and that's really good enough for what we're doing. You know, we don't have to chase the rabbit down the rabbit hole. Okay. Going into next week. So next week's going to be, goodness gracious. So next week is not going to be on one topic. It's going to be multiple subtopics, basically. We're going to go over the 5 love languages. We're going to talk about the difference between men and women. Not every single difference, but in the way that it relates to their identity and things like that. Yes, some people didn't want to do that, but it has to be done. It'll be done in an interesting way, most likely. But there are a few things that I will be going over for that part of it. I ain't scared. That's what I'm saying. I ain't scared. Okay, and then we'll get through those, and then we're going to revisit. Somebody in the group's like, yeah, we should revisit spiritual gifts now that we have all this other perspective and see how those tie in, see how all this goes in. And I'm like, that's cool. This is why we're going through and doing all this, to connect some dots and to kind of have a better understanding of all the different pieces of our identity. And then fruits of the spirit, things like that. So don't know how far we're going to get next week. Know that we're going to work on those things. There will be like a 5 love languages test, but it's a simple quiz. So we'll have that. I don't think we'll have the spiritual gifts quiz, potentially. I don't know if we'll take that next week, but really at the end of this, we'll have 4 or 5 different self-assessing quizzes or tests that show you different areas of what help form who you are. And the other thing that's a big thing, to me it is at least, is this whole concept that kind of came to me a while back. And we're cast and forged. And I talked about that a little bit. And for some people that's, it doesn't make sense, or it's a foreign concept. But so here's what it is. So casting is when you have a mold of something and you pour something into it, it hardens, solidifies, whatever. It could be metal. I use the metal side of it, especially for the forging. So for instance, like I worked at a place that made pistons and different parts for an engine. So you'd pour the stuff in, it'd be a sand form, molten metal goes in there, solidifies, you break out the mold, and you're left with a cast part that has like casting sprues, and it doesn't matter, but there's casting on it, or it's a casting. Now that casting is in the shape of something. That would be like your nature, okay? It would be those things that are just kind of built in. They're always going to be there. Now, what happens when something goes in a forge is really high heat and real intense pressure, usually by a hammer, beating down. So you high heat, high pressure, takes that casting and forms it by beating it with a hammer and intense heat. Forms it into a much stronger, much more refined, finished part. And I need to find, I will have to find some video to show the difference in them, but cast and forge is basically what we all are. We're casting an image, and then we're forged through experience, through environment, through all the different things we talked about to form who we are. And it's a combination of both of those. And I think that's very important to understand, and I think that's a simple way to think through it. If we're cast and forge, we're we're casting a certain way, that's not going to change, but we can refine it. We are refined by fire and by getting beat up, because sometimes that's just the way life works. So anyway, going into next week, we're going to go over those things. We will have some good subtopic discuss. I think there'll be some really good discussions next week as usual, and I'm looking forward to that. And then the week after, the plan is to kind of try to wrap this all up into a bow-ish of identity. And then we'll have the week off after that, because we're just going to take the week off after that. So this was kind of a plan for once. Weird how that works. Anyway, thanks for watching. Keep being real.